Hello, hello. Welcome to day 3 of Advent Tea. So, we're continuing our advent-tea-ure, adventuring with me. Yes. I'm going to try and cut down a little bit on time, so I'm not going to show you the box again. You've seen it. I've told you which one it is, all that good stuff. Instead, I'm just going to show you. Here indeed is day 3. So we'll pop that little guy out. And this one today is chocolate covered almond. So you can actually see that in through the tin. That looks like we've got some chocolate chunks in there. So that's going to be exciting. Today's tea does have sugar, black tea, roasted carob, almonds, yerba mate, and cocoa. So I do expect this to be a pretty sweet tea with those kinds of ingredients. Chocolate covered almond is absolutely going to be a flavor that appeals to me, so I'm really excited about it. And with my setup today, I actually even have the tea bag and a tea ball just to see after I pull this out of the tin what I might actually need. So live and learn. This one is recommended at that 95 degrees Celsius again, so I did go ahead and pre-boil my water. I'll hit it again in just a moment after I've done my smell test so that I can let that water again come back down a little bit. And the steep recommended is 4 to 5 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and open this guy. Absolutely, this tea, you can smell the chocolate. And so if you're a chocolate lover, you absolutely are going to love the smell of this tea. And I can see the black tea in this tin already. It looks a little bit like someone decided to take an Almond Joy and put it into a tea. Now, of course, it doesn't have the coconut, so it's not quite there, but that's what it looks like, and it's definitely what it smells like. So let's go ahead and pour some of that out. And while I shake that here, I will hit the boil on my kettle back there. All right. So, there are these white pieces here. I'm not entirely sure what those are. I imagine that has to be the Yerba Mate, potentially some kind of sugar crystal. Maybe the smaller ones are sugar crystals. Yeah, I think that might be the case. Because I can definitely tell where there's almond, as chunks fly off of my hand here. So that's definitely almond, which I just dropped. Great. Then there's the black tea, and these darker chunks are going to be that roasted carob. So I think I've identified everything. It also looks like this tea isn't going to be quite so finely grained, so I should be able to use my tea ball. So I'm going to go ahead and scoop things into my tea ball and get ready to go. Ooh. There is quite a bit left still in my canister, so I actually will be able to share this tea with my spouse. He hasn't had any of the other teas so far, and while he drinks tea, I don't think he minds too terribly, but since he does love chocolate, I will happily share that with him. So while the water cools down a little bit, today's ingredients of focus are that roasted carob and the yerba mate. And I wanted to go ahead and start talking a little bit about that roasted carob. And roasted carob is one that you might recognize if you tend to try to eat a little healthier, and you know that chocolate can be really high in sugar once we actually add the sugar to it, because chocolate just requires a little bit of that sugar to really make it more palatable. If you've ever had really dark chocolate, you know how bitter it can be. So what's interesting is that carob is actually naturally sweeter than chocolate itself is, but it's not nearly as rich. However, carob can also be a little bitter. It's in that same kind of family. So it makes sense that we would need to be aware of how we actually process the carob for consumption. And roasting the carob actually does get rid of a lot of that bitterness, which is one reason why we have roasted carob in today's tea. Now, of course, with sugar in that ingredient list as well as the carob, which is going to be naturally sweeter than the chocolate, and we also have cocoa in that ingredient list, I really do expect this tea to be quite sweet, which means that it's probably more along the lines of something you want to eat or drink. Sorry, you don't eat tea normally. You would want to consume it though, probably as its own dessert kind of thing. If you really like sweets, then you might consume it as it's partnering to another sort of sweet, but I could see this being entirely its own dessert. So, with regards to carob, as I said, roasting the carob takes out that natural bitterness that you find in the raw form. And this particular plant is a tree. It's a carob tree, carob shrub, something along those lines. And it is also known as St. John's bread, the locust bean, not to be confused with the African locust bean. Don't know what that is, but apparently there are two trees that are called locust beans. The locust tree or the carob bush. So all of those are going to be the same name for the same plant. But what is the key thing about it? It's a flowering evergreen tree or shrub, again, depending on how you classify your trees and shrubs. And it is related to the pea, which I found was kind of interesting because I know that not a lot of people eat peas. My husband will if I make him, but most people I think don't necessarily go to peas like, yum. So it is interesting that we have carob, which many people do like. The carob tree is native to the Mediterranean region as well as the middle-ish region of Western Asia and the Canary Islands and Micronesia in the Atlantic. So once again, we're looking at a plant that you're not really going to be able to grow yourself if you're not in one of those areas. So now we're kind of starting to see why tea is as valuable as it is across human history, because a lot of the ingredients that we even want to put into our tea are not easy to source, at least in many regions that drink tea. For instance, you have the Silk Road that brings tea all the way across Asia and into Europe, and because of that, it actually led to eventually England overtaking China as the country that consumed the most tea in the world. And we do think of England as a major country where tea is consumed. It's part of their culture, which I think is great. I think all cultures should be tea drinking cultures, really. So about carob, in addition to its use as a chocolate substitute and as a thickening agent, you can use it to thicken some of your baked goods when it's powdered. Carob, which actually has no caffeine or theobromine, which is one reason why it is considered healthier than chocolate. It is also actually then safe to use in treats for dogs. If you have a dog that likes chocolate or likes to get into those kinds of things, carob is actually a safe alternative for them. But carob has also been used to treat diarrhea, heartburn, high cholesterol, vomiting, obesity, and the malabsorption of nutrients from food in the intestinal tract. So there are a lot of positive health benefits to carob, as well as it being a good source of vitamins and minerals, such as calcium, zinc, potassium, phosphorus, vitamin K, riboflavin, and vitamin E. So again, you're going to get a lot of health benefits if you have carob in your diet. Probably not if you have it all the time, but you're still going to have some benefits from adding it in here and there. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and get that water. I'm going to remember to measure it this time. So we can be a little more consistent about it. All right. And I am continuing with that same white teacup just so I can continue to compare the color of that brew. So there's my 6 ounces. And already some of the smaller tea particles are coming through that tea ball, but it won't be nearly as bad as it would have been if I had done that with the rooibos yesterday. So, all right. Like most teas, it's already starting to get a little bit of a goldish kind of color. Thought I saw some oils potentially from the chocolate already breaking through to the surface, but I think that's just light. So let's talk about yerba mate instead now. You might find yourself thinking about drinks that have more of that Hispanic or Latin flair when you hear yerba mate, and in part that's actually because yerba mate is native to South America, and so the drinks involving yerba mate come from South America. It is primarily consumed in Paraguay, Argentina, Uruguay, southern and central western Brazil, Bolivia, and Chile. So those are our countries that really have a strong yerba mate tradition, I guess. Interestingly enough, due to the cross-cultural sharing because of immigrants from Syria to Argentina, yerba mate is actually really popular in Syria and Lebanon. And I found that kind of interesting because obviously that's quite a ways away from South America, but we have that cross-cultural sharing of ideas and traditions, and I think that's just wonderful. And interestingly, regarding the immigration from Syria to Argentina, after Brazil, Argentina does have the second highest Syrian population in South America. And Syrian immigration has been at a pretty steady influx in recent years, partly because of the ongoing wars in the Middle East. And Argentina was the second country in South America after Uruguay to declare in 2014 that they would happily accept some of those Syrian refugees. So I thought that was an interesting thing to note as part of that process of immigration and cultural sharing. Yerba mate is a shrubby tree. It is actually also in that evergreen variety. It does not say that it's related to peas though, so you're probably safe from the risk of liking something that's related to a vegetable. And yerba mate as a plant does contain caffeine. So we have the caffeine in here from the black tea already, some from the cocoa that's in the tea, none from the carob, and then we have a little bit more in the yerba mate here. So this is going to be a little bit more in that caffeine content, definitely way more than rooibos because rooibos has no caffeine, if you recall. Yerba, just so you know, basically means herb with an H. So herb if you are British. The mate part of the phrase yerba mate comes from the Quechua word mati, and that literally just means it's a container for a drink as well as a gourd. And my understanding from reading about yerba mate is that it used to be traditionally consumed out of a gourd. So, get your gourd ready. The indigenous people who first used mate called it ka'a, and that has the same meaning as herb. It's that plant that has flavor. And in Portuguese, yerba mate is sometimes called congonha or congona. I don't know if in Portuguese you pronounce H's or not. I speak Spanish, so there might be a little bit of variation on that pronunciation. But that comes from a Tupi expression that roughly translates to what keeps us alive. So if you're combining all of these translations and ideas from South America with how we've arrived at yerba mate, Yerba mate is basically the herb you drink from a gourd that keeps us alive. I personally like to think that this is a little bit about making sure that no one eats something that would kill them. You think about how we come to eat different plants. Almonds, for instance, have a really high rate of killing people because there's only one type of almond that we can actually safely consume. So who's hanging around eating almond after almond to actually figure out that, oh yeah, that one's safe, but that one's not. So I like to think that with the names of these plants, like with Yerba Mate, you've got people who are sitting around making sure we're going to survive. Our people will survive and carry on. So, you've got people not getting confused. You can't have someone sitting there going, which one of these can I consume? And you've got the elder going, the one that keeps us alive, Gerald. Yeah, right. Yeah, I was about to get those confused and drink the one that causes slow and agonizing death. So, names don't always have to have these super complex ideas. In fact, I think most of the time when we get down into their origins, they don't have complex ideas. And, when it comes down to survival, you don't want to mess around at all. Of course, now I don't have a drinking gourd for my tea, so I'm just gonna have to deal with my teacup here. But I think that we are at that time to go ahead and consume it. So let's come over here. Use the tea ball to mix the coloring around a little bit. Very much like day one's tea that had that white chocolate that I could smell from a distance. I can smell those chocolate notes as I'm shaking out the moisture from my tea ball. And I may actually have made a mistake in using that tea ball because you can see there is quite a lot of leakage of tea leaves down at the bottom of my cup there. It's kind of a middle brownish color. It's not nearly as clear. That liquor is kind of what we call the actual liquid of the tea. The liquor is not nearly as clear as the white chocolate Let It Snow tea on day one. Not as clear as what yesterday's rooibos was either. So this is a pretty murky colored one. But, it's tea colored. So interesting is that up close I don't get nearly as much of that chocolate scent. I mostly get tea as a scent rather than any of the additional flavors there. I think this one might be the most balanced one that I've tasted so far, because I definitely get that chocolatey flavor, which has got to come from the roasted carob, and again from a little bit of that cocoa that's at the end of the ingredient list. But I definitely still get a sense that I am drinking tea. I've got that typical tea flavor also in there, but it's not overpowering. It really blends in nicely, and then as that finish, I get a bit more of that almond. So I'm getting all the flavors combined here. It's a really, really pleasant experience because I do get everything that I think I'm supposed to on this one. So I'm a big fan of this one. I actually think this one I like the best of the three I've had so far, in case you are looking for my best recommendations. This one I do imagine would be quite excellent with a bit of cream in there, potentially a touch of vanilla just to really highlight and bring out some of those sweet qualities. I'm not going to do that because, again, I'm just tasting it for what it is. But I really, really do like this one. So if you are looking for a tea variety to have and have on hand as like a nice dessert alternative, I definitely recommend get the chocolate covered almond from David's Tea. Okay. Thank you for hanging out with me today. I hope you learned a little bit, and I will see you with day 4 tomorrow.